Welcome back to the Winter Growers Podcast. Today on the show, I have two guests, Emily Von-Trapp of Von-Trapp Flowers in Waitsfield, Vermont, and Linda Darko of Little Farmhouse Flowers in Jay, New York. Emily and Linda each operate their own cut flower businesses with a focus on wholesale and winter flower bulb forcing, and they collaborate and teach flower farmers how to bring beautiful flowers to bloom during the coldest, darkest months of the year through their Tulip Workshop, offering both a filmed online course and on-farm classes. Along with a second Lilly Workshop, their collaboration has inspired hundreds of flower farmers to grow local blooms during the dark winter months. We talk about their backgrounds, how they met, along with an uncanny list of similarities they share, including a birthday, and some of the specifics of their farms, such as growing infrastructure and systems. Lots of great information shared in this episode by two wonderful women with a passion for local winter blooms and friendship. Today's episode of the Winter Growers Podcast is brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. When you need proven varieties you can count on and detailed guidance from seeding to harvest, consider Johnny's your trusted growing partner. Our same-day shipping can help keep your planting schedules on track when the unexpected happens. We're here to help you grow good food. Turning to Johnny's means you can plant high-quality, trial-proven varieties with confidence and know that our expert staff is ready to help with first-hand knowledge, because we've grown them ourselves. This episode is also brought to you by Rimmel Greenhouses. Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or vegetables for your family, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment for a harvest you can count on. Rimmel Greenhouses are strong, durable, and easy to assemble, offering the quality you need to grow productively year-round. The team of experts at Rimmel will be your trusted partners to ensure you get exceptional value from your greenhouse investment. Visit rimmel.com today. All right, enjoy the show. Welcome to the Winter Growers Podcast. Today, my guests are Emily Von-Trapp of Von-Trapp Flowers and Linda Darko of Little Farmhouse Flowers, both of whom are in the Northeast and along the 44th parallel. So we have Linda is in New York and Emily is in Vermont, and both of whom are flower farmers. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So I was really excited to speak with both of you, and I thought it would be fun to bring you both together on the same episode because you not only are both flower growers, but you have a focus on year-round growing or winter blooms, something of which I don't know a ton of about. So it's good to for me to learn new things. And also you have this collaborative approach that I find really interesting. And you've created a Tulip Workshop, online educational course together. And I'm excited to learn more about that, how you came up with that idea, what that collaboration looks like. I'd love to get started with a little bit more about your backgrounds, if you want to sort of share one after another, basically how you got into farming, and then how you met too.
You want to go first, Emily? Emily has a much longer background than I do.
So I kind of came to farming organically, in that the land where I'm growing my flowers now was originally part of a dairy farm my grandparents bought back in the late 50s, and they ran as a dairy farm. In the early 80s, they gifted my mom and dad 10 acres that they operated as like veggie market gardens, and eventually started growing some field cut flowers. And then ultimately moved more towards like a retail nursery, so annual and perennial bedding plants and things like that. So from a really young age, I was involved in harvesting and cutting flowers, and I started making bouquets when I was 12 and selling them to the local farmers market. And it just kind of was this bug that never left me from that early age. And by the time I was 17, I was selling to two wholesale markets close to where I live in Waitsfield, so Waitsfield and Montpelier. And then was a teacher as well as a mom, and trying to figure out, there's a lot of balls in the air being a flower farmer and a teacher and a mom, trying to figure out how to narrow things down, find one focus. And I decided I really wanted to stick with flower farming. But it's really hard to live off of a seasonal income, especially in the Northeast with our season being so short. That's when I really started dabbling with this idea of year-round growing, and when I started experimenting with tulips. And that was maybe back in 2011. And I've been 100%, 365 days a year, full-time flower farmer since 2018. So up until that point, it was more seasonal for me.
I'm curious, Emily, you grew up on a farm and you obviously had an affinity for flowers and growing things, but did you ever have a time where you really just wanted to get away from it? Did you have to leave and return, or was it something that you just knew sort of innately in your bones?
Oh, there's like this magnetic connection for me to my family's land that's like runs so emotionally deep, to the point where sometimes I'm like, can I just uproot myself for a second and not feel like I need to be here? But to answer your question, I traveled a lot. I went to school out in Montana. I spent some time in East Africa. I spent some time in New Zealand. But no matter where I went, how far away I went, I always came back. And I don't think I missed a flower season. Like, I was always back in the summer running my cut flower business in some capacity. So that like need to come back to the land and come back to, where my family is rooted is just, it's really strong.
Yeah, no, I love that. I'm also curious, you have an interesting family history too. How has that influenced sort of this continuation with land and wanting to, share that beauty with other people?
Yeah, I think when it's like a multi-generational farm, and like my grandmother, I call her the OG of agriculture in our family. Her name is Erica Von-Trapp. And so she was really the driving force behind my grandparents buying the dairy farm. And all the conversations I had with her when she was still here, she was so passionate about the land, and being able to have access to land and farm it. And I think that really, has sunk in deep for me. And I think it's important, what my parents have done. They've created beauty for our community. They ran their business for 42 years as a retail nursery. And there's something really fulfilling about being able to grow something beautiful for your friends and neighbors in the area. And I don't know, I think it would be really hard for me to ever step away from that. It's something that it brings me a lot of satisfaction and joy. And yeah.
And what about you, Linda? How did you get into this?
Sure. I came to flower farming through my career in teaching and education. So growing flowers was a summer hobby. It seems to be for a lot of people who are entering our industry right now. We're seeing a lot of teachers. We're seeing a lot of people who started dabbling with flowers during the pandemic and felt their power and their magnetic pull in different ways than what Emily described there, but very similar ways. And it just got to the point where I was leading parallel lives. Emily and I have a lot of similarities. In addition to the same birthday, the same previous career as teachers, there are all these uncanny things that sort of happened in our lives. And we both got to a point where we were living these multiple personalities, working so hard in some administrative educational roles during the day, trying to do flower farming at night and early in the morning, and eventually just got to a tipping point where we decided, we're going to make a go for this, and we're going to go all in, and we can always go back to our past life if we need to, our former lives. But that's where things really started for me. And that was around 2016, 2015, started dabbling with flowers in the summer times. And then was fortunate to meet Emily through an online workshop. My cats keep jumping on the table, so I'm sorry for the bouncing. I met Emily through an online workshop, a flower farming workshop, and she started sharing there what she was doing in the wintertime with the tulips. And then I started begging her to teach me how to do it and to teach other people and to come up with some kind of workshop where she was sharing that knowledge with other people. So eventually she did, thankfully, for me and for many other people now around the world. And I was one of the very first people to sign up right when it opened, to go to her farm and learn what she was doing. And our relationship, our friendship kind of grew from there. And we realized that we had all these wacky similarities. And then as someone who's also in education, I was bound and determined to be the A+ student coming out of that workshop to make sure that everything worked out all right. And then I made my teacher proud.
So proud.
So I followed up on what I learned there, applied everything that I could, and things started to take off for me here. I was growing in a really different way than Emily was growing with the nursery and the facilities that she has there on her family's property. I had very limited resources here, but she helped me figure out how to make good use of them, creative use of them. And eventually I decided to try growing hydroponically. And so that's where our friendship and our student teacher relationship turned into something a little bit more. We got to the point where I was like, oh, I think I could contribute this back to the course now. Now I'm doing something a little bit differently. And then we realized how powerful collaborating on this could be. We were hoping at one point to maybe do some kind of agro-tourism thing where we would bring people and share our love of tulips through trips to Holland or something like that. And then everything changed when the whole world got sick and no one wanted to travel anymore. So at that point, we decided we had to make our workshop something that was more accessible. And that's when we got it filmed and put it online and have grown it since then.
Well, there's still time to do your little travel workshops. So don't give up on that idea yet. I'm sure there'd be a lot of interest. So Linda, your sales approach or your business model was more kind of wedding industry, events, and which is different from Emily's background. And I'm curious, sort of like, what did you learn from that? How has that informed you in your collaboration? How has that helped your farming path?
Yeah, it's been, I think, a really nice complement to our work together because my background has been solidly in that farmer florist genre. I was an art teacher previously, have a lot of background in design and communications. And I initially started flower farming here in the Adirondacks near Lake Placid, thinking that I was going to be selling my flowers wholesale to the florists who were doing all of those weddings and events. So there's a lot of destination events in our area, and that's the primary outlet for sales because we have very low population and not quite the right retail market for purchasing a luxury good. So I was doing that for quite a while, and I was determined myself to be providing my own grown flowers rather than imported goods. I founded my business on this notion that we live in this incredible park, this beautiful park, and there are all these people who come here to celebrate and to host their events. And they're coming here to honor this place and to feel the beauty of what the park has to offer. And then at the same time, they were bringing in all of these floral goods from very far away places with a huge carbon footprint, which is really, not at all in line with their desire to bring their family and friends to this beautiful place and to celebrate nature. So that's where things got started. And when I went to the florists in this area without any proven history of being able to grow flowers at all, just this dream, they kind of shut down that idea pretty quickly. I was like, will you buy from me? And they're like, oh, don't know. Can you even grow? And I'm like, I'm going to do it. It's going to be great. And so I decided rather than be swayed from my plans to be grower and designer at that point. And that's how I made it go for quite a few years, really until Emily and I began to work together. Our workshop took off, and then some other opportunities opened for my company.
And did you feel like this was definitely your path and you were determined to figure it out no matter what? Or was there, sort of that like experimentation, like you really wanted to make this work, but you weren't quite sure how?
I think both Emily and I kind of enter into situations with a tremendous amount of confidence and a determination to just make it work. Like, we're going to figure out how to make it work. We both like to MacGyver our way out of situations, make weird tool contraptions that make life a little bit easier. I was determined to make it work. I had the benefit of being able to start my seedlings in the school's greenhouse where I was working. Um, and eventually I had all these seedlings. It was about this time of year, and the contracts for the following school year were due back. And I decided I'm going to take my seedlings and run. And I'm going to find a place to plant them. I was living in faculty housing at the time, so I didn't even have land to put them on or a plan really. But I had, a couple months before they got leggy to figure out where that was going to be.
And I love how, I mean, you were speaking earlier about the uncanny similarities that you share, like a birthday. And I don't know if you realized you're both along the 44th parallel, but that was something I immediately picked up on. So with that, comes all the challenges of being able to grow in the winter. And I'm curious for you, Linda, when did that idea start to really gel for you? Was it meeting Emily or was it before then?
It was definitely going to Emily's workshop because I didn't have at the time any heated greenhouse spaces, small or large. There wasn't really, in my mind, a way to accomplish that. We had our little farmhouse here, and it's on about 2.5 acres that we tilled up, and I built some beds and some rows, and I was going to that workshop when she started to help me think about how I could make use of things like the farmhouse cellar and this little trailer that I use outside as a flower cooler to kind of pull things together and start growing some things, start forcing some bulbs in the wintertime. That was really the first time.
Well, good. Well, now I want to know how and what you learned, both from Emily and from each other about tulips in particular. Like what is, what's the secret to all of this?
The secret, I think it's finding, infrastructure that works for you, like what you have available to you, and figuring out how to take tulips and bring them into bloom. For us, like Linda was saying, our setups are very, very different. I'm using a couple different spaces to cold hold my tulips because I grow 200,000 a season. And there's a lot of like planning and organization that goes into having enough successions. So, we both come into the season pretty early. Linda can hit it a little earlier than I can because she's growing hydroponically. And she has a really stable basement setup that she can use. But we're able to kind of really plan out our successions and hit, almost the entire winter. So I have a lily crop that I grow up until January, and it's like as soon as those lilies are done, for my like early winter crop, we move right into tulips. And it's all about timing and succession. And I think a lot of people think about winter growing and they think it's going to be like really challenging and really stressful. And one of the things we found with this crop is if you can pay close attention to like all the data, all the information you have about each tulip and variety, you can actually have way more control and plan this out in a way that's, to me, much less chaotic than high summer growing. We're able to keep better tabs on our growing environment because it's cooler. So we're not dealing with like, a mega heat wave. We might get some warm spells, which can be challenging for us. And definitely we've seen with some climate change, things have gotten a little trickier. But, I find summertime growing, we've got, we're dealing with pest pressure, we're dealing with drought, we're dealing with, all of these variables that are really, really challenging. And winter growing, tulip growing specifically, really simplifies things, and it's a much easier crop for us to like bring into bloom.
I am curious if you can walk us through sort of the basics of the systems that you're using, kind of like where you start and where it ends, both from your different approaches too. So maybe start with how you approach it, Emily.
So I am growing primarily soil based here at my farm because that just works with the infrastructure I have. Growing tulips, there's a few things we have to really pay attention to, one of which is humidity. And depending on your environment and your infrastructure, one method is going to work better for you than another, unless you're really lucky and you can grow both soil-based and hydro in this same infrastructure. But for me, I stick with soil-based grown tulips. So we're ordering our bulbs typically around this time, so February, early March. Those bulbs are then sent to us from Holland, and they arrive, my first batch, usually the end of September. And my very last delivery usually comes in mid-November. And in order for us to have a really long season, so January into almost June, we're using different bulb treatments. So over in Holland, they are pre-cooling bulbs. So they're putting them, once they've reached what's called G stage, when the flower is completely developed in the bulb, they're putting them into cold holding. And that's kind of tricking the bulb into thinking that it's been through the winter cycle. So those end up being our bulbs that bloom first for us. And so I'm able to have flowers blooming usually, somewhere around the 1st of January, 1st through 8th of January. And I go through all of my pre-cooled bulbs, harvesting lots of different varieties in succession. And then usually at this point in the year, I'm starting to use bulbs that have had no treatment. So they're just stored without it being that colder 5C storage. And so we're pulling our crates out of cold storage every week into growing houses and staging houses, which allow us to be harvesting, hundreds, if not thousands of stems a week, depending on what we need to meet the market demand. And Linda can talk a little more about like bulbs and sourcing, because she's importing lots and lots of bulbs now.
Yeah, so similar process here, and really for all growers. And what we're seeing, unfortunately, is that every year it seems like there's more and more pressure on the bulb industry, and with climate change too, things get a little bit more difficult every year for our bulb farmers in Holland. So every year it seems to be a little bit earlier that we're needing to try to reserve bulbs or put in a wish list of bulbs with our bulb suppliers, or a bulb rep if you're a farmer working with a different bulb company. A couple years ago, we started to import bulbs here through my farm directly from Holland, because there were a couple of things that Emily and I were noticing over time. One was that we didn't feel there was super great communication from bulb companies. So as growers, we sort of built these different problems into this new branch of my company that is now very much focused on serving farmers in this way with the bulbs. So Emily and I are helping them with the growing. And this is sort of a natural progression of that. All of a sudden there are so many growers who are like, where do we get the best bulbs? And I'm like, well, we can recommend these different places. And I was like, but I think I can do it better. So communication was one thing. Bulb quality was another thing. Timing and accuracy of information. Emily's talking about cooling bulbs. All varieties have a specific number of cooling weeks that they prefer. And when we think about the natural cycle of those bulbs coming out of the fields in Holland, they're coming from all these different farms, and they're coming out of the fields at all these different times. And if we really want to dial in, we're doing a lot of research and working with our network over there to find out exactly when each variety is coming out of each farmer's plots and when they're beginning their cooling, so that we have the most accurate and detailed information. So those are some things that we wanted to bring to importing. And we began by offering these bulbs just to our students from the Tulip Workshop, because we weren't really sure what it was going to be like or what the demand was going to be like. And that's grown substantially. So now we're able to offer them to more people too, which is wonderful. We're just getting ready to launch this year's pre-order process, which is kind of wacky. So farmers will place their pre-orders, and it's like a wish list, because obviously anything that you ask for now is unknown. It's going to be harvested in the summer. And between now and the summer, a lot of things can happen. A flood, a drought, a very hard frost. So it's just kind of like a hopeful wish list. And then we'll come back to our buyers in the summertime, and we'll say, these are actually the quantities of each variety that we were able to secure after all of these things happened between February and July. And then there has to be a substitution process. And that's one thing that frustrated us about the bulb industry. before is that we were sometimes being sent substitutes for varieties that we did not approve. Sometimes we even requested that they be taken off orders in writing. We'd send emails, we'd make phone calls and say, no, we don't want that variety. And they'd still show up at our door. We'd still be billed from them for them. So those are some things that we wanted to change. So we're growing here on my farm now in support of the Tulip Workshop. We're doing our research here. We're continuing to grow hydroponically and to improve our systems there, because it's a much newer process than what I learned from Emily and her decades of experience. We're still figuring out and learning things here, but contributing back to the course that way, and very much focused on providing educational resources to other flower farmers. So we have a monthly membership where we talk about everything that's happening here behind the scenes with video tutorials each week, and monthly sort of live sessions where we go on a little bit deeper into particular topics. And those explore all the different things that have helped me grow my company from those very first stages, working at the farmer's market and trying to get maybe just one wedding client to sign up and give me a chance, to where we are now, and everything along the way. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Can you describe the hydroponic system and how it differs from Emily's and why someone would choose that versus soil grown?
Sure. I think the first kind of primary difference and thing that we have to caution growers about is that it requires kind of a completely different mindset. You can't really share your soil forcing areas with your hydroponic areas to some extent. So, we don't, if you think about a hydroponic system, it's water-based and everything has to be very clean. So we don't want to have soil and dust and dirt mingling in with our hydroponic system. But it's also not as complicated a process as it sounds. You don't need to have these giant flow tables. You don't need to have a lot of circulation. We're working mostly with single trays that are about the size of a bulb crate, which is 60, a foot and a half wide by 2 feet long, and we're filling them with our bulbs and our water and our special solutions that we that we use, and really, being careful with our planning and successions in a lot of ways that Emily talks about being careful. One of the things that I love about hydroponic growing for this kind of work is that we're able to plant our bulbs in successions throughout our season. So when we grow and we're growing with soil forcing, we're recommending that our growers plant all of their bulbs at once when they receive them. And that is in part a safety measure, because the bulbs are very safe when they're locked into the soil. But with hydroponics, we're able to kind of spread that labor across the season. So I love that about it. I also love that it's less heavy weight carrying, because hydroponic tray with the water poured out is very lightweight compared to a soil forcing crate. But it involves more storage spaces. It involves some very careful planning for humidity and temperatures, monitoring bulb health, because they're kept dry until the point when they're stored. And there are a lot of things that can go wrong in those processes between receiving your bulbs and actually having a flower at the end. So those are the processes that we explain in our course.
Yeah, no, I'm just fascinated by it. I mean, from my perspective as a vegetable grower, hydroponics, you feel like you lose flavor, you lose, there's all those things you lose compared to soil grown, or even just the philosophy of growing things in soil. But from a perspective of a flower or something that you're not consuming or eating, it changes that, right? And it's interesting to see what are really those benefits that you can take advantage of as a grower, where you might have disadvantages from the other side. So.
Yeah, I think we hear some similar concerns from people in our industry, like, oh, you grow hydroponically, they're going to be shorter, or they're going to be less healthy looking. My cat is trying to dump the flowers off the table. And I heard some of those concerns from my bulb reps previously. I also heard you won't be able to get tulips for Christmas while I'm standing in front of my tulips blooming well before Christmas. So there are, I think, a lot of misconceptions out there. We harvest our first tulips this year on December 7th. Very early. We planted them in November. So that's kind of remarkable when you think about the the time length between planting and actually reaping the rewards from your plants. It's awesome. And what we've learned here is that if you do things properly, the quality is not diminished. A couple of years ago, when Emily came down into my farmhouse cellar, the tulip dungeon down there, and we had let all of our flowers blow open for the purpose of recording and filming our course. We just had this sea of color, and all on nice, tall stems, healthy plants. And, I think you almost have to see it to believe it. Sometimes I wish I could get some of these bulb reps to come and see it in person, because they're used to these very professional facilities in Holland, the greenhouses with the natural light and shade, structures and things that can, be changed quickly at the press of a button, and robots and all this stuff. It's not necessary, but you do need to do things properly. You do need to have the right amount of light, because tulips love light. They do need a lot of water. And all of it is just thinking about what the plants need and helping them achieve that in creative ways.
From a cost perspective, I'm curious. I mean, Emily, from you were coming from a pre-existing infrastructure. So, obviously it's easier to continue what you already know and do. But for a new grower, would it make sense to invest in a hydroponic system right from the beginning?
I think it really depends on what they have for infrastructure. I don't know if this is just where I'm growing, but I've dabbled, I tried hydro, and given, how cloudy and humid it can be sometimes here in Vermont in January and December, I really did not have success. The other thing is, I'm really trying to work with the resources we have and not blow a lot of propane. So I'm trying to keep my temperature a little cooler. And so I end up with more humidity fluctuations, which can be really detrimental for tulips in any growing situation, whether you're growing soil-based or hydroponically. So I think it really depends on what people have for infrastructure, and that they're being really mindful and looking at the recommendations we're giving them, and making sure what we're advising can work within what they have. The cost wise, Linda was saying how it's much less heavy. That's huge, the cost on our bodies. The other thing that's really great is the cost of soil. You're eliminating that to do hydro. And then there's the environmental cost of, when you're getting a soilless mix or pro mix, that's a peat-based product, which is non-renewable. And we're both, wanting to steer away from that as much as possible. I try to use mostly compost. But yeah, so cost is definitely a thing. I think there's less cost. And yet I don't know if they had an infrastructure like mine and then they wanted to build a more climate controlled space to do hydro, is the cost then found there? A lot of our students are growing hydroponically in interior spaces, like basements like Linda, or a spare bedroom, or, a shed or a garage, or our students are super creative, and it's really cool to see them finding success with the limited resources and infrastructure that they have. But yeah, I think it just really depends on what a person has available to them for infrastructure.
I would say that for most growers, it's easier to start with soil forcing, because in the process for hydroponics, we really strongly recommend these 3 separate spaces that you need for the different phases of production. And for soil forcing, it's really that there's really 2. There's really 2 main spaces that you need in order to be successful. So that's a barrier, because when you're talking about heating and cooling and climate cold spaces and walk-in coolers and that type of thing, it's seems to be a little bit simpler to start with soil forcing. And then also because of the humidity concerns, with working with lots of water hydroponically, um, and because it's a newer process for us as teachers, and for the world generally, we really recommend that if people want to try hydroponics, that they sort of add it, that they try soil forcing, that they try soil forcing first, or that their entry into tulip forcing, if they want to begin with hydroponics, that it is small. They're risking as much as they're willing to lose, essentially, because there's so much you have to figure out about your own particular growing spaces along the way, and there are lots of ways to learn how to control them and to monitor them. That's a huge thing, monitoring them. But a lot of our growers are also coming to this with a full-time job that keeps them away from their homes during the day, during times when they might need to vent a greenhouse or open some windows or doors, So they have to be pretty careful and thoughtful about how they enter into this kind of work too. Our program is really designed for professional growers, for people who really want to foot the bill of the learning, because there's a substantial amount of learning and investment that they're making on behalf of their businesses, in order to learn how to be really profitable at this, to be to run an efficient business financially too. There are a lot of factors that go into it.
Hey, podcast listeners, we're going to pause for a moment to hear from one of our show sponsors. BCS two-wheel tractors are designed and built in Italy, where small-scale farming has been a way of life for generations. Discover the beauty of BCS on your farm with PTO-driven implements for soil working, shredding cover crops, spreading compost, mowing under fences, clearing snow, and more. All powered by a single gear-driven machine that's tailored to the size and scale of your operation. Tractors and attachments are on sale now. Find sale pricing and your nearest dealer at bcsamerica.com. That's bcsamerica.com.
Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. So our work has always been about keeping farming information as free and open to the public as we possibly can, and that won't change. One way in which we make that possible, though, is through advertising on podcasts like this, on our YouTube channel, on our forum, and so on. So if you are a small farm-related company selling seeds or tools or something growers could use, or if you're an organization putting on some conference or offering a grant or looking for farmer contributors or something else farm-related that I'm not thinking of, get in touch with us at farmermichelle@no-tillgrowers.com. That's farmermichelle@no-tillgrowers.com. Supporting us helps to grow this work and grow farmers. So we all thank you. Again, that email is farmermichelle@no-tillgrowers.com, or you can find our contact information at no-tillgrowers.com. All right. Thanks, you all. Enjoy the show.
And speaking of spaces, I'm curious to learn a little bit more about, Emily, your snow bunker. That seems to be an integral part of your whole system. And how does climate change affecting that, and what are the alternatives?
Yeah. So, I was saying that I have like rooting spaces and then growing spaces, and that I'm planning out my successions. And so when I first started experimenting with tulip growing, and, it was originally about extending my year-round season. And then once I kind of got that, I was like, well, how do I extend the tulip season now? Like, how do I have them as early as possible? And how can I push the envelope to have them absolutely as late as possible? And when I say late as possible, I mean after the ground plantings have bloomed here in Vermont. I'm still harvesting tulips for a couple weeks because of this cold banking infrastructure that I use. So essentially, my snow bunker is a space where I move my very last successions of tulips to bloom when they're still in the rooting out phase and they haven't really broken dormancies. Their tips might be, cresting the soil surface a little bit, but they're at a point where I can really pause or suspend their animation. So when I first started doing this, I would create a pallet frame out in the meadow. And then I would pack that frame full of my crates of tulips that I wanted to hold off. I would water them in deeply because I knew they were going to get tucked in for a while. And then I'd take my John Deere tractor and just backfill around that space. And then cold bank, use a fan, blow in cold air so that I could slowly freeze them down to about 28 degrees. And then the snow was my insulator. It closed that space up, and I could maintain that frozen 28 degrees for weeks and weeks. Things would pop up, like we'd all of a sudden get a rainstorm in like mid-February. And so I'd like hoof out there to the meadow and like throw some plastic over the top to try to preserve my snowpack, and then throw some, frost fabric over that to make sure that like the sun wasn't warming up the plastic. And then, as soon as the threat of rain had passed and snow was on the horizon, I'd go move that off so I could keep getting as much snow as possible. And now I use a 40-foot shipping container. And so that's my frame instead of having to build the frame out of pallets every winter in February or January, which is kind of a chore. I have this lovely, metal frame. And so same idea. We're packing in thousands and thousands of tulips for our latest successions into this space, watering them deeply, banking the whole thing with snow, and then cold banking at night, bringing in that cold temperature. And it's like pushing the pause button. And one of the things we're finding as we're teaching our students, everybody's rate of learning is a little bit different, and their understanding of like our processes is a little different. So we've had people who their tulips have gotten like a little bit beyond what I would ever put anything into that suspended animation. They're too far gone to stop and pause. So we're trying to teach people you have to do it, when they're still like just barely breaking dormancy. And then I can, late in the season, once my other successions are done, I can pull out, 100 crates every week from that snow bunker. And that gives me usually my Mother's Day flowers are coming from that, and anything after that.
Now, I'm sure you're aware of the CoolBot that a lot of, vegetable growers will use for, a cold storage space. Is that something that you would have to incorporate into this system, especially with climate change?
Maybe. The reality is if I can have the space insulated and I can get cold temperatures, which, we are still getting cold snaps here. The thing that's becoming harder and harder for us is snow. And so we've been thinking a lot about making our own snow, power washing snow guns and things like that. Or just using like a really thick insulation I use some foam board on the roof of the snow bunker, because sometimes it's hard to get the snow up there. So if the whole structure is really well insulated, it's just about pulling in enough cold. And a CoolBot, the reality is I couldn't get it as cold as I need to with a CoolBot. So, I am opening that structure up and pulling in cold air when it's like 13 degrees out, because you think about it, I have this mass of crates. It's huge. There's hundreds and hundreds of crates in there. They're all soil. It's a huge mass that you have to cool down. So I'm pulling in that coldest air to try to get that entire mass down to that 28. But then once it's there and I close it up, it can stay at that temperature. It can hold it, because again, you have this mass that's a mass that big at 28 degrees. It takes a long time to get it to warm up to the point where those tulips want to start growing again. So as long as I can have really good insulation and maintain that temperature by keeping it closed up, it will work. And as of now, here we are, third week in February. We have decent snowpack. We take all of the snow from our parking area, like everything on the property gets plowed there and then gets, moved with the bucket of the John Deere tractor. And I have a snow blower too. So there's a lot of energy that goes, human energy, and a little bit of gas powered energy that goes into creating the structure. But one of the things that I think is so awesome about it is I'm using all the natural resources. I'm using the snow as my insulator. I'm using the cold air as my cooling, and I'm not relying on, tapping into our solar array for power for keeping that cold, and it works. And so far it works. I mean, I do get a little nervous going forward about climate change and how that's impacting my growing, maybe less as far as my snow bunker is concerned and more about late season successions or, a midwinter thaw or spike in temperatures that can actually cause your successions to kind of like run into each other. I had a situation last April where two of my successions, because we had 85 degrees for like a few days, they all blew open and it was like thousands and thousands of flowers, which is frustrating and hard to deal with when you're, while I have a lot of markets that I sell to, that kind of like a super bloom is more than I'd bargained for. And so we ended up doing some donation stuff with that. But yeah, climate change is scary. For right now, I'm like keeping my fingers crossed that my snow bunker can continue to keep things cold for a while going forward.
Yes, well, I wish you abundant snowfall for your area of the country because it seems to be declining in so many other areas. So, which is scary. Yeah. Well, I love you did a social media post just recently, right after Valentine's Day, about you shared you have like 100 former students from your course and how all of them now can potentially be selling tulips for Valentine's Day locally. And you've actually created, I believe, like a map where you can find your local tulip grower. And I just think that idea of creating this network through your education and your course to then expand, access to local blooms is really, really cool. So,
thank you. It's wild. We actually have almost 1,000 Tulip Workshop members around the world now. So we have some that participated and sent us their photo to include in our promotion this year, and some that have decided to put their businesses on our Find the Grower map. But all in, there are many more that are growing around the world, which is pretty awesome. I don't have an accurate count of the number of countries that we have members from, but they really span so many different places and so many different climate zones. Also, that's one question that we get from people who are interested in joining us. Can this work in our climate? But really, it's all about applying the science. Are you able to apply the science and give the plants what they need? So we have growers here in the States from, Florida to Alaska. I think our furthest northern customer or student is in Yukon territory. That might be the furthest northern.
With no light in the winter.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's so great. And I love, I just love being able to share the knowledge to grow access and beauty, around the world. So it's really, really amazing what you've done. For listeners to know how they learn more about this workshop, where do they go? Can you point them in the right direction?
They should visit thetulipworkshop.com, www.thetulipworkshop.com. And we have right now 2 courses. We have the Tulip Workshop that we've been talking a lot about on this program. And then Emily, who's also been growing and forcing lily bulbs for a very long time. And I worked on a Lilly Workshop course. And that's kind of fascinating because, Emily mentioned lilies earlier in the program and how they bring her through January. It's possible to actually grow lilies year round. It depends on your climate and whether or not you're able to, transport them outside safely. Sometimes it's super cold up here and we can't do that. But the Lilly Workshop is our second course. And many of our members find that these 2 crops, like we do, we find that they dovetail so wonderfully. And actually, Emily, maybe you can talk about how important they've been to your full program there, having access to both of those.
Yeah. So I actually started growing lilies long before I started forcing tulips. And they were always kind of like a staple on my farm for my summer and fall crop. Again, like tulips, they can be programmed. So I'm planting every week, which gives me a flush of flowers to be harvesting every week. Like Linda said, you can grow them year round. I typically am planting starting in March and having flowers in May through January. And then my tulips kind of hit the other months, January through May. And they're just a great crop because they're really easy. They're really reliable. You can get them. Some people say, "Oh, I don't want to grow lilies, or my customers won't like lilies because they're too fragrant." And while I understand some varieties are very, very perfumey and fragrant, there are plenty of really beautiful, amazing varieties that are non-fragrant, like LA hybrids. And like tulips, we didn't really talk about this, but tulips have this incredible vase life, especially if you're growing fresh and local and they're not being imported. And it's the same thing with lilies. I have customers who say, "Oh, your lilies last 10 days to 2 weeks." And I've never had flowers that have lasted so long. They make a great focal flower as well as, just straight up lily bouquets. They've been a huge part of my business. And so I sell here mostly through wholesale to like co-ops and markets. So I'm bringing tulip bouquets in the winter and then the lily bouquets in the summer, mixed bouquets with perennial flowers and foliage. But they're really a wonderful additional crop. And with those two, it's allowed me to do year-round growing.
I love the longevity of the blooms. It's equally astonishing within the veggie world too, especially winter veggies. I have had customers who've said, "Oh, I forgot I had this thing of kale, in the bottom of my crisper, and 2 weeks later it's still fresh." So yeah, it's great just to see the power of, local and things that are grown well and in season. So, well, what's next for both of you, in both collaboratively, individually? Do you have any, fun plans or visions?
Yeah. We've been throwing around a couple of different ideas. Our programming to date has been crop specific learning. And that's something that we felt was really missing from our industry. There's a lot of surface level, this is how you plant annual seeds, plant a cutting garden, that sort of thing. But those programs didn't really help us really launch our businesses and make them programmable and reliable and year round. So we're really interested in other crops that can, and ways of growing that can sort of fit that bill, and provide some really specific, in-depth, detailed learning to help people make their businesses more profitable. So we have, at least one crop that has been kind of earmarked as a possible addition to our program. And then we also have a program that's more about a type of growing, a kind of growing. So we're sort of tossing both of those things around, and we really invest heavily into our programs. We've hired a production company to film them, professional editing. We have our books are all printed in full color, and they cost a substantial amount of money to print. Even one copy. So, we really enter into these with a lot of thought. So we have some things on the burner, I'd say. I don't know if we're really wanting to share them, but what do you say, Emily?
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing about both Linda and I is we're not stagnant. we don't sit still. We're like, there's constantly ideas coming up, and things that we're tossing around, and, figuring out how we want to manifest the next idea. I think for both of us, while these two crops have been really, really important and pivotal in our businesses, there's a few other things that have really helped both of us. And so, we care a lot about our students' success. And if we have more information and little tricks and tips to share, we want to do that to help other growers be successful. So there are those things on the burner. And we're both, with Linda with the bulb section of her business and her, pro platform. And she also does a cold climate rose course, which we haven't even talked about. And then, all the stuff that I have going on over here, and we both have families where we're busy, but we're, trying to bring some of those other things, into manifestation. So hopefully we are able to get things out into the world, more things soon.
I will say we also view our current courses, the Lilly Workshop and the Tulip Workshop, as living, breathing programs. And Emily and I provide support through private Facebook groups dedicated to each of our courses, where our students are accessing us directly for support. And that's an ongoing and sometimes very consuming part of our lives, keeping a presence there and making sure that our students are actually able to ask us directly if they have questions or need support or ideas. And then we're trying to give back to our courses as much as we can. We keep experimenting. We keep trying new varieties. We keep changing our recommendations because some varieties will just sort of disappear that we're working with. They may fall prey to disease in Holland, or some other factor may make them less appealing to the farmers in terms of growing and producing them for bulbs. They may be kept in Holland for cut flowers instead of sold as bulbs. So we're always looking for new varieties and testing new varieties for our students also.
Yeah, no, I mean, the platform you use is definitely, it can remain more relevant, unlike just publishing a book and then having to continuously update it. I mean, you're able to keep things more real time, and that is very valuable. So it's very exciting to see what you'll do next. And you two make a powerhouse team for sure. So it's great to see the collaboration. So on that note, let's shift to the lightning round questions if you're ready for those. Now, this is the first time where I have 2 responses to your selection of lightning round questions. So I'm not sure if you've both selected the same ones. So we'll kind of find out as we go here. Okay, we'll start with one from Emily. What is your favorite crop to grow, cook, or eat?
So to grow is tulips, hands down.
Linda, do you have anything to add to that one?
I'm infatuated with roses right now because that's kind of, something that we've been working on here and figuring out how to grow them effectively in our cold climate. I love roses, but I love them all. You have to ask me tomorrow. I'll give you a different answer probably.
Well, number 2, what is your favorite tool?
My tractor. Hands down tractor.
I have this little, this is so silly. I have this little battery powered fogger right now that I love. I can put compost tea in there. I can put milk for going after powdery mildew. I love a mint product that I'm using in there right now. So I just find this little thing so useful. It's rechargeable, and you can just swap out and wash the containers that you're using for compost tea or neem oil or something like that. I love that tool. It's by Petra Tools, little mini fogger thing.
Number 3, what is the hardest part of farming?
I think there's so many aspects of farming that are hard. But it's funny because are these supposed to be really quick answers? Sorry.
It's the slow lightning round. That's what it's become.
I think the hardest part of farming is that everything is constantly changing and in flux. There are so many variables that you are working with or working against. And so that makes farming challenging.
And I think sometimes the hardest part of farming can be not actually farming, not actually growing, but the selling. We see that with some of our students who are like, yes, I've tackled this. Now I can do this. They have to learn how to move the product too. And I think some people, especially with flowers, they enter into this world. They think it's going to be all beauty, no struggle. That can be a struggle for some folks.
Yeah. And the timing, like you were talking about earlier, I mean, if you have a super bloom and you can't unload them, I mean, it's so hard to get that timing just right. So next question, favorite smell and least favorite smell on the farm?
I think for me, there are lots of favorite smells. This time of year, it's walking into the greenhouse on a really cold morning and you hit that warmth and earthy smell and that humidity, which is like so void from the landscape. And that's like kind of like magic. Least favorite is, I can't even tell you how many times I've almost collided with a skunk in the garden. So That's going to be my least favorite.
Favorite here are the roses, and least favorite are our composting. We do food waste composting. We accept food waste from our community, and that can be pretty strong.
How do you turn off farming, or can you, do you?
I don't know that I turn it off. I think, when I'm away from the farm, I'm still constantly thinking about all the components there and what's next. But I do love to get out and be active and play outside. And I think probably the time that farming is furthest from my mind is when I'm doing that. Like if we're out skating or something, then I can shut it off a little bit.
I have a similar response. I think I turn off certain parts of my job, and I give myself room to explore other things. So, Emily mentioned before that we can't really rest on our laurels very, very easily. So typically for me, because this is my passion, my craft, my art, I'm learning about some other kind of crop or some other way that I might want to try growing when I'm stepping away from the tulips or something else here that I'm tired of or getting bored with. It's kind of like, what's next?
What do you love besides farming?
I love being outside, getting into the mountains or going for a long skate or being at the beach, just being out in nature, being with family, people I love, that kind of stuff.
I love time with my kids too, and art making. I love photography. Those are some of my passions.
What would you be doing, I guess, if you weren't farming?
I would be a photojournalist, probably over in a third world country or a war zone.
I think I'd probably still be an art teacher, and I don't count out going back to that someday. I really love that job too.
Might be a good retirement plan from farming, right? What's one piece of advice you wish you had starting out or something you wish you had done differently?
I really wish someone had told me to not wait and to just go for it. I think we get caught up in our society. This is not going to be a short answer. I'm sorry. We get caught up in our society that everything needs to be safe. We need a conventional job. How could you possibly be a year-round flower farmer in Vermont? I did sit on my laurels for way too long being an early educator. As much as I was busting my butt and trying to make it work, I wish somebody had said, just go all in, just go for it. If you have a passion, you have an idea, something that you want to really do, don't be worried about, I wish someone said, don't be worried about the money. Don't be worried. You're going to find a way to make it work. And the reality is, I believe so firmly that if you want something to happen and you will it to happen, you will manifest it. And that has been my experience over and over and over. If you put it out in the universe, this is what I want, this is what I hope to be, the universe is listening and it comes back to you.
I think I can chime in with that too. I feel similarly about going all in. And I think when I was forced to sign that contract to return the next school year or not, that was a gift. It felt like a lot of pressure at the time, but it was a gift because it meant this is my clean break. Now I can focus on building this new thing that I really want to build. And I could no longer lead this dual life because when you do too many things, everything just ends up feeling mediocre. And I think it can be so hard if you don't have that push or that person telling you to go for it or that contract that you have to return or not, to just feel like I'm not doing enough to make the leap. And sometimes you just have to make the leap first and then find a way to be enough on the other side.
What is your learning edge? Where do you feel like your abilities or understanding as a farmer could grow?
I think that we are constantly learning. I think that in farming and in life, I've been around growing for decades, and I watch my father who's been around it for decades, and we're both constantly learning something new about a crop, about a new pest coming into play. I mean, it's just it's lifelong learning being a farmer, especially with our changing environment. I think just learning, we're always in it.
I think my edge is overcoming the long game. You really have to be in it for the long game when you're farming. And I don't know, so active, and sometimes you just want things to flower, but you have to be willing to wait to see your rewards. And sometimes, the plans that we're making now don't actually come into fruition for years later. When we're thinking about putting together a course, these are also well researched, and so built on experience, and that happens seasonally. And a season can be a short period of time in 1 year, and then you have to wait 3 more seasons until you get to try that thing again. So that's, I think, difficult for people sometimes, for me anyways.
How do you relate to that which is out of your control?
You have to just embrace it and roll with it. I mean, that's been a huge one for me, is that you need to learn how to pivot. You need to learn how to, make lemonade when you have lemons. You need to take, that crop that's blown open and has bloomed, and figure out how you can create beauty with that. I think just having a very, very flexible mindset and rolling with things.
I think if you can look at disappointment and through the eyes of learning too, you can reframe your approach to failure. So instead of feeling like, oh, this is an absolute failure, this didn't work, well, you learned some incredible things through that failure, and that's going to form how you approach that problem in the future, or that challenge, and now you'll be able to avoid it because you learned something new. If everything always worked all the time, it might be kind of boring. We wouldn't be learning new things. So I think that's something that I'm thinking about.
What is it that you long for, and how do you feel that influences how you farm?
I think I long to share beauty with the world, and, provide moments of beauty that bring people happiness and a smile, and take the edge off of whatever their daily grind is or their daily pain. Just like a little something, little bit of magic from nature that can make somebody, happy or smile. And I think that really informs my drive and my process and what I'm trying to do, just sharing beauty with other people.
I think that as owners of our own businesses, we have this special opportunity to leave something behind that we're proud of, and that maybe it makes the world a better place in one way or another, but it's our opportunity, and it's there for the taking, instead of being burdened by bureaucratic tape or red tape at some company or business or some hierarchy somewhere. When you start your own thing and you're able to run it your own way and put your voice into the world, I think that's so empowering. So I love that about what we're doing.
And finally, how will you grow old, or how are you growing old farming?
I think growing old, I'm going to follow probably my dad's model, which is to just keep doing what you love and keep moving and keep growing and keep being inspired by nature and interacting with other people who are as passionate about what we're doing. Yeah, I think trying to stay young that way, stay active.
I guess my answer is also very similar in this case. I love that the nature of our job keeps us moving outside and busy. It keeps our minds thinking about the future and what's to come next season. There's so much more weight in that question. Also, I realize when we're thinking about retirement for farmers and what's happening in the future for our families when we're no longer able to farm, for example. And those are some things that, again, I think are somewhat empowering about running your own business. You're able to make decisions about where your profits are going, and how you're spending your funds in terms of reinvesting them in your own company or in the future for your planning. So I'm not sure exactly if I answered that question in a way that you were hoping that I answer it, but I'm a work in progress here in all of those ways. And looking forward to figuring some things out and dialing them in better for sure. But I don't have an exact plan for my future as it stands right now.
Good answers. Well, thank you both for taking the time to speak with me. Flowers is a whole nother side of farming that I don't have as much experience with, especially winter blooms. So I'm really, happy to have this chance to speak with you and learn about it and share it with our listeners. Both of you bring a lot of intentionality and thought and care and intelligence to this conversation. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Today's show was produced by me, Clara Coleman, with support from No-Till Growers. Special thank you to Willie Breeding for the theme music. Thank you to the patrons at patreon.com/no-till growers for helping to make this show possible. Thank you all for listening.